thank everybody for attending today. I think these series of events have been quite helpful. And like a lot of us, I think we've all been dealing with COVID and not really knowing the impact of what tomorrow holds. So I know Arthur, everybody in the business knows Arthur, and he's made a living out of tracking business and forecasting, and I think he's going to share with us a lot of information, the good, the bad, and the ugly, I guess, as to maybe what we can expect. And as Stephanie had mentioned, it's going to be an open forum. If anyone has questions, they can either raise their hand or use the chat, and we'll be feeding the questions to Arthur throughout the hour, and hopefully we'll get a lot out of this. So Arthur, if you would, please take it away.
All right, thank you, Brent. It's fun to be here. Glad to see some old friends in there and some new friends and some folks I don't know. So feel free to ask questions whenever you like. And if I get too far in the weeds, you'll understand I deal in statistics and numbers. A couple of things. First order of business. I see that we have a lot of realtors listening in, and that is fabulous. I'm going to begin the session with this sentence, and I'm going to end the session with this sentence. And I really think this is really going to set the stage for what we're going to see down the future. Great realtors do best in bad markets. I'll say it again. Great realtors do best in bad markets. Why do I say that? I hate to use the word average agents or mediocre agents, but when it's really easy to list a house, put a sign up, and there's 10 buyers waiting for it, you just got to fill out a contract. That's a pretty easy market. When it's a tough market, when it's really hard to find a buyer and you really have to overcome some serious objections, both from the sellers and the buyers, it takes a really great agent with great people skills to be able to put that deal together and keep it together. And that's going to be the key coming down the pike. There are a lot of properties under contract right now in the MLS. A lot of them are going to fall apart. Just get over it. It's going to happen. We're going to see some probably very dramatic fundamental changes in the real estate market over the next 6 months and into February. Toward to the end, when are we going to basically see the real estate market really hop up and go crazy? And crazy in maybe not the best way, but go crazy. It's probably going to be in February. And why do I say that? Because I've always learned, being in the business as long as I have, if you want to project the next 10 years, look at the last 10 years. People really don't change. Human beings have certain basic fundamental needs, and food and shelter are right at the top. They need a place to live. Now, their ideal is places to live in, some gorgeous place, and that's fine. But most people's economics require them to live within their means. And that's basically what we're going to be looking at in the near future. What do we see right now? Well, first order of business, let me just go through a few stats. And again, I don't want to get too far in the weeds, but if somebody has some really detailed questions, email them to me and I'll give you data that'll make your eyes glaze over if that's what you want. But I'm going to just try to hit the highlights from a greater New Orleans standpoint. And I'll get into a little bit about regions, but for the most part, I'm going to talk in micro markets. Right now, what's happening in the marketplace? Well, in Orleans Parish, closings are down 40% for the month of April compared to last year. Now that's closed sales. That's not refis. That's just real estate closings, down 40% for the month of April compared to April of 2019. In St. Tammany Parish, closings were down 19%. In St. Bernard, closings were flat. They haven't gone down at all. In Jefferson Parish, they're down 39% from April of last year. And in St. Charles Parish, they're down 17%. How does that compare greater New Orleans as a whole? Well, it's pretty dramatic, frankly. The closings for greater New Orleans, and this is all property types, by the way. To look at the economic impact across a market, I'm including multifamily, even vacant lots, everything. What's the total real estate activity in a marketplace? And last year, for the month of April, all the realtors put together 877 million. This past April, just ended, they did 631 million. That's a 28% decrease in closings for the month of April. Well, that's not too good. But again, a sense of perspective is really needed. You know, commissions, realtors are paid based on commissions, which are based typically on the sales prices. So sales volume is an important determinant of how much income is going to be in a market, basically by the number of realtors. And the number of realtors has basically remained constant. How does that compare with April of 2006? Why did I pick April 2006? Well, that was after Hurricane Katrina. And after Hurricane Katrina, who was home in Orleans Parish? People had gone to Baton Rouge, they'd gone to Livingston Parish, they'd gone to Tangipahoa Parish. They had moved out of Orleans, Jefferson parishes because of the overall economy and the loss of housing stock. That's a key word, the loss of housing stock. In this Corona environment, we're not losing any housing stock. So it's important to just keep that in mind as I give you this last number. Again, last year, this time, we were 877 million. April of 2006, we were 460 million, almost half. What do we see going forward? Well, going forward, there's going to be a series of, I think, some not so happy events for folks. I've talked about the closings that we have right now that probably a lot of them are going to fall through. But with that, I hate to say it in this kind of a positive light because it's somebody's misery. That's an absolute, write that down in ink somewhere. Unhappily, that's going to happen. What happens when there's a lot of REOs in the marketplace? Typically, there's a lot of foreclosures. Those are sales that are usually bank sales coming down the road. We saw that several times. We've seen that during the oil bust in the 80s. That I tracked, and I don't have the activity index currently because of MLS, and I'll explain in a minute. But the worst activity index that I ever was able to track was in 1988, and it was 16%. And what is the formula, which says that for every 100 listings that come into the MLS, what percentage of them leave the MLS as sold or success rate? And it was 16%. So what does that mean? For every 100 listings that realtors only won a sale through a realtor, the rest went to foreclosure, expired, somebody burned it down, who knows? But it didn't go through. Back during the oil bust in the 80s. We're having a similar situation now, I believe, to really what happened in 19. Again, use history as a guidepost. After Hurricane Katrina, I went to for the recovery of the Gulf Coast. And some of the congressmen I met up there, I hate to say, said, let us sink in the marsh. Basically, they didn't want to spend any money down here. And it was one congressman who was from Pennsylvania. And I'm going through this anecdote to get to a point here in a second. He was an older gentleman. He'd been a congressman in Pennsylvania for decades. And I went there to lobby him because he was on the House Finance Committee. And I had heard the House Finance Committee didn't want to appropriate any money down here. And so I finally was able to break through and get into his office, literally. And I talked to him and I said, Congressman, I understand you're holding up some money to go down to the Gulf Coast. And he goes, what are you talking about? He says, absolutely not. I said, well, I'm understanding it's Pennsylvanians, congressmen that are the big holdup. He says, no. He says, look, I'm from Harrisburg. I'm from East Pennsylvania. That's West Pennsylvania. Those people are crazy. He says, from East Pennsylvania, I remember Harrisburg, which was the capital. And back then, they had a hurricane back in 1972, that was so bad in the state capital, they had to evacuate the governor by boat. So he said, I'm very, very simpatico with trying to send money down to New Orleans. He says, but a couple of things you're going to have to remember. It took 15 years for you all to recover. That's how long it took us to recover. Same thing happened in Hurricane Andrew in Homestead, Florida, 15 years to recover. Well, here we are 15 years later from Hurricane Katrina, and we had recovered. Largely, we were rolling and going. So he was pretty smart in that thing, not to set unrealistic expectations for when the recovery would occur. But he also told me one other thing which really hit a nerve. And he said, Arthur, no matter what you do down there, he says, and I'm just telling you from experience, he used the term which I wouldn't use. He said, people are stupid. He said, people won't learn. He says, they're going to go back to their old habits. It's no matter what happens, they're going to tend to go back to the way they did things before. It's human nature. They will forget the pain that went through, or the pain will be so diminished that it just won't be as big a deal anymore. And when you look at that, you think about it today, and I look at the realtors that we've got online. I mean, how many realtors online today went through Hurricane Katrina? Not a lot of them. So these are all new things for these new realtors who were just entering the market. And some of the more experienced, older agents, they remember it well, and those memories are carved in pretty deep. But the younger realtors, they're really not that attuned to how bad it was from a business standpoint, from a real estate standpoint. Well, what do we see going on right now? Pretty much the same thing. We're having some real problems right now because the whole chain of real estate sales, it's just a series of dominoes. And what starts the dominoes from hitting the next one and putting the next one over, it's the first-time home buyers. If you don't have first-time home buyers, they're the first domino to knock over the next one. If you don't have a volume of first-time home buyers coming into the market, the dominoes stop. And where is it felt the highest? At the top end of the market. So I think we're going to see some real slowdowns in some higher ends of properties, or some falling sales prices in the upper end. That's happened in the past. It's temporary. A lot of people are going to have to discount their houses because they have to sell. Those who don't have to sell obviously will not, and will wait it out, and there's no reason to worry about it if you're anything else. But we're going to have a lot of those kinds of problems. We've got a lot of forgiveness money coming into the market. Who knows what kind of an impact that's going to be past 90 days? That's really the key. So if we go back in history and say, well, how do we 1918? Now this sounds absolutely crazy to go back over 100 years.
Arthur, I'm sorry, could you repeat that? Because you kind of broke up a little bit.
Yeah, I said to go back to history, go back to 1918, back to the time of the Spanish flu. The Spanish flu was every bit as egregious and economically horrific as this flu is today. Probably worse. Worse because they didn't have the health improvements that we've got today. So those who got sick, they died at a much greater rate, usually 6 to 10%. We're at 0.6% or less than that, and usually it's because they've got some other health issues that exacerbated it. So what happened in this? Come on together and then see if that kind of dovetails with what we are probably going to see. Well, the Spanish flu. Yes.
Excuse me. I think when you're leaning in, you're hitting your microphone on your computer, and that's causing us to miss some of what you're saying.
Okay, well, thanks, Conrad. Can you hear me okay now?
Yes.
Okay, I'll try to stay.
Like kind of patchy every now and then.
Okay, it's probably clipping off. But the Spanish flu first started in the United States and hit New Orleans because it was a huge port. And it happened for the almost exact same reasons. We didn't have the Chinese coming in airplanes. We had ships coming into the port. And that's how it entered the greater New Orleans area. It started in April of 2018. It slowed down and almost evaporated during the summer of 2018. But then it reappeared with a vengeance in the fall of 2018. By February of 2019, it was over. I mean, literally, it was over. There were like 0 cases. So why did that happen? Well, summer months, obviously, viruses just don't survive as well. People are outside, they're further apart, I guess, from each other as a general rule. But even back in 1918, people avoided handshakes, they wore masks, they did social distancing. If you go back and read the history of what the political leaders required of people during that time, just take off the date 2018 and put, 1918 and put 2020, and it looks like somebody just Xeroxed the same marching orders. Really unbelievable. Well, with that as a backdrop and knowing that human beings don't basically change very, very much, we will adapt to certain things politically that we have to. For example, after the 9/11 tragedy, we all had to go through the TSA to be able to get on an airplane. We had to take off our belts and our shoes. We had to make some adjustments, societal. We're probably going to see some of those. But do I think handshakes are going to go away? No, I think people over time, and maybe some people may never shake hands again. In terms of what's going to really turn this whole thing around, that's it right there. This is it in one word. This is what's going to turn us around. And so the conflict is going to occur, and we're seeing it every day in the newspaper, every day. And the exact same thing. After 60 days, people were crazy to go back to work. They wanted to get back out. The summer months made them more active. They got out. They put tremendous pressure on the political leaders to open up restaurants, to open up shows and theaters and sporting events. And the political leaders relented and said, okay, too much pressure. Yeah, I think we're over the hump. We should be okay now. Well, that worked out okay during the summer months, but then when the fall hit, there was a huge resurgence in the Spanish flu again. And unfortunately, it also merged with the regular flu. that was what they used to call back then the grip. And so as a result, it took herd mentality, not herd mentality, but herd immunity to basically defeat the virus. And that took till February of 2019. Now, remember, during all this, we were all in World War I. So we were already under economic stress in one regard, yet we were at full production manufacturing for the war effort. So we were at full production, even though we're at war, but we had a lot of problems during that period of time. So with that as a backdrop and a sense of history happening here with real estate specifically, well, without the first-time home buyers pushing those dominoes up, allowing everybody else to move, we're going to be kind of stuck in the gate for a little while. We're having some real problems in we had a kind of a double whammy, unfortunately, with the oil and gas industry. That's for worse timing. And of course, now with people home, less oil and gas usage. It's great that we have low gas prices if you want to fill your car. Good as your car. So I think we're going to have some real problems on a statewide level, probably more so Baton Rouge, dependent on state government. And when you, okay, Stephanie, can you hear me?
Yeah, it was still kind of breaking up a little bit in the oil and gas statements. Sorry.
Okay, well, I'll repeat. If it clips off again, let me know. But the oil and gas industry, again, we've had hiccups with it in the past. We've had oil and gas problems where there was a shortage. If you all remember in the 70s, you know, you couldn't even fill up your gas tank because your license plate was an even number gas license plate versus odd. So on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays, you could go fill up if you had an even numbered license plate, but not the reverse. Tuesdays, Thursdays, and the other days for the odd. So there was such a shortage. We got through that. We also got through times of high interest rates in the 70s and early 80s. For the old interest rates went as high as 17 and 18% to go to a homestead or a savings and loan. 17 or 18% to get a home loan. It was cheaper to get a Visa or MasterCard than it was to buy a house. What really exacerbated that period of time, and I'm kind of getting to a point here to show the engine of realtors and mortgage lenders that no matter how bad things get, they'll find a way to make it work. And can you hear me? Even though interest rates were 17 and 18% to buy a home, there was a law in Louisiana. And the law in Louisiana at the time, there was a usury law. Home loans could not exceed 12%. Well, you go, well, now what do we do? You know, I was an agent during those period of times, and I was basically a new agent, and going, how am I going to sell a house when the interest rates are 17 and 8%? But the law in Louisiana is you can't charge more than 12. And so what people wound up doing, what the lenders did, they said, well, we understand that we're limited to 12%, but we're going to make it up by charging points. So my favorite one, there was a loan officer from Eustis Mortgage who came and trained us. And she said, we have 12% interest rates now. You can sell houses. And I said, well, how are you able to do that? She says, well, it's actually 12% plus 21 points. I said, 21 points? Yes, but we can finance the points, which makes the overall yield 17, 18%. So here we go. Realtors found a way to put house sales together at 17 and 18% when there was a state law saying you couldn't charge more than 12. We're going to see the same kind of unique ability of realtors to find ways to put deals together. They may be bond for deeds, may be much more commonplace. Owner seconds may be much more common. Who knows? We're going to have to see how that impacts. We are going to see really some tough sledding in some of the markets that are heavily dependent on areas like colleges and universities, Tulane, Loyola, UNO, Southern, Dillard. I mean, those young people are at home trying to take classes online, but they're not out. They're not out. They're a vital part of the economy. They're not, you know, they don't have part-time jobs right now in the service industry. They may have some part-time, they may have some income coming in from PPE and some of the other SBA programs, but that's not long-term. I think in about 60 days, we're going to see a return to businesses opening up, much as we did during the Spanish flu of 1918, simply because there's way too much economic pressure to open up. People they don't want to be standing in a food line. I mean, that's basically what's your choice? Stand in a food line for your family, not be able to afford diapers for your children. I mean, you don't have a choice. I mean, let's just talk reality. We're going to do what we have to do to get back to our economy. Are we going to have a resurgence of the flu? Yep. What's the good news? I am 1000% positive we're going to have much more effective treatments in the fall for the flu. Much more, not for the flu, for the virus. Much more. Will we have vaccine by then? Who knows? It's infinitely more important at this point psychologically to be able to have treatment for this virus. And that's the piece that's missing right now. Consumer confidence is what drives real estate sales. If you don't have consumer confidence, you don't have people willing to go and take out a mortgage and close a loan through Brent. It's not going to happen. They're afraid of their job. Am I going to have a job? What's my employer's financial situation? Is he going to be laying me off? I've seen in the past where some employees wanted to, work from home, telecommute, and that's fine. And I think on a short-term basis that it works for some industries and some departments, and it's fine. Facebook CFO just said 95% of all of his employees right now are working from home. 95%, that's Facebook. And he said, now that's short term. And his answer is because he's got hundreds of thousands of square feet of office space built for these people. They're coming back. A lot of the companies, if you talk to businesses and employers, many times when they have to make layoffs, I hate to say it, but not generally, it happens that the folks who are telecommuting from home are the most vulnerable. They're the ones that get laid off, usually, all things being equal, first. Why is that? Well, it's about relationships in an office. People like to see people, talk to people. How's your Aunt Sophie? Hey, how's it's that social interaction that connects people. And even though you can do the physical job at home remotely, it's the social connections that keep employees loyal to an employer and an employer loyal to the employees. So I don't see the telecommuting being a long-term, life-changing event. It will in some industries simply because you're able to do it. But in some industries, I just don't see that probably in my lifetime. Maybe down the road, robots will do everything and they'll just send us mailbox money. I don't know. But for our purposes of our discussion, I think we're going to see a healthier real estate market in February. I think we're going to see some declining sales prices in many price ranges because that's what's going to happen. We saw that before. The desperate people who have to sell their house, there are opportunists out there. There are house buyers and there's house thieves, right? I mean, they're buyers who are just looking to steal somebody's house, somebody's misery, and they take advantage. And that's now going to set the new appraised value. So I think we're going to have some serious appraisal problems coming down the market. I don't think there's any question about that because those depressed sales, they're going to adversely affect somebody's value who's not even willing to sell. So if you don't have to sell, then don't. But I will say this, the time that great agents do the best is when they build up their listing inventory in these kinds of markets. This is when they make hay. I mean, I guarantee you, it's like a squirrel gathering the nuts. Go get all the listings you can get your hands on. I would also seriously, I can't recommend this strongly, call everyone you know, everyone you've ever sold a house to, and just ask them, how are you doing? I'm checking up on you. I just want to make sure everything's going okay. That phone call is going to be worth a listing. More than that, a permanent relationship. They won't forget. Because I'm going to tell you, and I've seen this movie a lot of years. I can't tell you how many realtors come and go every year. I won't even begin to, I do know, but I'm not going to be negative about it. A lot of realtors are in the real estate business 1 year, 2 year, 3 years, drop out. Well, what happens to all of those sales that they made? No one calls those people back. They're abandoned out there. They're orphans out there. You need to call on those people. Go back and double check and check your MLS closed sales. Call your broker, ask for broker's records. A lot of the brokers, I'm sure, are doing that. But it's really critical that you reach out to people and try to reestablish a relationship and see if you can help them in any kind of way. It may be for their son who needs a rental. It may be, who knows? But just reach out and call people. That's going to deliver so much down the road, you're never going to be able to appreciate. And that's what the great agents always did in bad markets. They reached backwards to people who were basically ignored by their agent who left the business. They couldn't, if you ask 100 buyers, 100 people who own homes, who bought their homes through a realtor, and ask them, and let's say they bought it more than 3 years ago, and you ask those people, those 100 people, what was the name of the realtor or the real estate company that sold you your house? I'll bet you 50% of them can't remember. They're abandoned. But the other 50%, they know them like the back of their hand because the agent has never left them. So I think we're going to see a lot of, but it's going to be a lot of distress. It's going to be a lot of distressed sales. Stephanie, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you just broke up in that last sentence.
Okay. We're going to see a lot of sales, but they're going to be distressed sales in the short term. And I think that's going to happen probably through the fourth quarter of this year, probably into the first quarter of next year, and probably into the second quarter. Because as you know, as most of you know, who've gone through this REO process before, when somebody is going to go into foreclosure, how long does it take for a lender to take control of the property offered for sale and then get to a sheriff's sale? Many times it can be 6 months, 9 months. So there's going to be a lot of inventory that's going to be sitting out there that's not saleable, but will be for sale at some point. So I hope I'm kind of giving you all maybe some negative, but also some positive. Because I will tell you, at the height of the oil bust, when things were the worst, after the REOs were out of the marketplace, the real estate market in New Orleans flourished, and it flourished for decades. Long term, we're going to have some problems in some areas of Orleans Parish specifically, much worse than others, much worse. And that's as negative as I'm not a negative person, but I have to be honest. When you look at the hospitality industry, you know, if you live by the hospitality industry, you die by the hospitality industry. We're in trouble. I've talked to an individual who's got hotels yesterday, and they don't think major conventions are going to come back to this town till 2022. They may get, but everybody is in a hunkered down situation right now. I think that's going to change, frankly, rather dramatically once businesses start to open up. Because again, I don't think the political leaders are going to want to stop some businesses from opening up and letting people earn a livelihood and get back to semi-normal, if you want to call it that. But again, it's going to take a while. A successful treatment, well publicized, easily available, that could change things literally overnight in terms of consumer confidence. The younger people are the ones that are most likely to get out and not worry about it. I mean, that's just it. The older folks, they're the ones that are much more conservative, much more likely to shelter in place, much more likely to kind of avoid common situations. But it's important to kind of look and see, well, what's happening in the marketplace today? I mean, right now, let's say a Walmart. I mean, the parking lot is filled. I mean, try to find a parking space. Social distancing, Walmart, Home Depot, what are you kidding? You know, they're all fixing up their houses right now. They've got nothing to do but see the faults in their houses, and they're all fixing them up. Why does Walmart have such a huge, enormous parking lot? Why? To accommodate the customers, but all the inventory they've got in the store. That's what's attracting the customers, and that's why they need the parking lot. Realtors are no different. You need inventory. You need listings. That's going to be your future sales. So I think that's probably the opportunity I think that realtors have right now. And also to reach back and give some comfort and support to people out there that need it, that are in dire straits. With that, I'm going to kind of go off on just a little bit of a different tangent for a second, because I think that one of the things that's going to be kind of damaging in the short term in Orleans Parish are the B&Bs. And, you know, they're built on the hospitality business. And I think a lot of people, unfortunately, on these properties. And I think some of these are going to be in trouble. So I think Orleans Parish and some of those areas, we're going to see some of these reconvert back down to rentals, but unfortunately, the values will be a rental rate, not a hospitality rate. And that's going to be a significant downturn. And the mortgages, of course, are not going to go down proportionately. So I think we're going to see some values change rather dramatically in some of those hospitality areas. And again, you know, where are the areas that are going to be most impacted? Where are the jobs? When you look at areas like St. Tammany Parish, you can look at some of the micro markets. Actually, Mandeville, not so much, but Covington doing pretty well. A lot of folks in Mandeville still commute to New Orleans for their jobs, and they're not there. Covington, their jobs are more likely to be in St. Tammany Parish. Doing very well. Surprising, to be honest about it. Hammond, Ponchatoula, doing well. So certain parishes are doing well, but they're more rural. There is more social distancing just because of the natural environment. You know, they live on larger lots. They're not in big apartment complexes and have common touch points that we would have in Orleans Parish in some of the areas. So I think we're going to see some opportunities. Kenner is really kind of, I don't like to say dead in the water, but let's just say it's definitely on a flat line right now. We're really not seeing many sales in the Kenner area. We are seeing some in the Metairie area. Orleans Parish, the upper price ranges we had a few starts and some nice upper prices, but not nearly what we're accustomed to. With that, let me just kind of caution everybody who uses the MLS to kind of keep track of the market. And I've brought this to the attention of Missy at Nomar, but you all need to be aware. When you go to the hot sheet on the MLS, you see the number of houses that went under contract last 24 hours, last 3 days, last 7 days. Don't look at that and think that number by itself is gospel. It's not. What I have found is that a lot of those properties that are under contract, some of those properties actually were consummated. In other words, the buyer and the seller signed the contract. I found one, they signed the contract last December. Is when it is entered into the multiple listing service by the secretary. So what appears on the hot sheet has nothing to do with when the property went under contract. It has to do with when did the secretary or the agent get around to entering it into the multiple listing service. So there's a lot of properties that are under contract that show up, but actually were consummated before the coronavirus was even. So be cautious. Take a look at that when you look at the hot sheet and you're using that as a benchmark. And the reason that's important is because the properties weren't entered as under contract in a timely fashion, it's been showing as active and distorting the number of active listings all that time. So you're not getting a true active listing count because it was actually under contract a month ago, 2 months ago. So if you're trying to advise your clients what the absorption rate of listings in a particular area or price range is, make sure you take a look at that under contract date and don't look at the hot sheet date. Look at the actual date that says under contract in the listing detail. Now that's a little in the weeds, but I know some of you all like to get in the weeds. Conrad, I know you're one of those. So I figured that was for some folks' benefit. With that, I'm going to try to open it up to some questions because I can ramble on for a couple of hours, as most of the people who know me are aware. Any particular questions that I can answer?
Question. The difference I see between Katrina, the aftermath of Katrina, and now, there are a lot of them, as you pointed out, but one of them is rental investment properties. I think this is going to be different, and I haven't quite put my finger on how different it's going to be. But obviously, some landlords who have banked on rental income have had some tough times, and and are stuck with tenants or have to have tenants that aren't able to pay their rent. And that's going to be something that's going to take a while to get out of the market. But, and after Katrina, rentals were in high demand. If they were on high ground, hadn't flooded, people were looking for a temporary home while they figured out what they were going to do. Now I think there's going to be a little bit of a vacancy, a higher vacancy of rental properties. And the sale of investment properties might not be as much in demand as before this all happened.
You're right on, Kyrie. It's all about jobs. I mean, we're going to see, you know, 2 people, you know, sharing an apartment compared to 1 person before, maybe 3, maybe 4, whatever it takes. We're certainly going to see that as an outcome. And you're right. There's a lot in Orleans Parish, especially. My gosh, what is it? 60%, 50% of the properties are multifamily. If you take out New Orleans East, my gosh, it might be 70. I don't even know what the numbers are anymore. But you know, that shotgun double where you live in one side and you rent out the other side, you know, I see a lot of landlords that have given some forbearance, that have reduced the rent for a temporary period of time to try to give them some time to get some air into them and keep them afloat, because the cost to replace a tenant is expensive. You know, empty units, that's worse than a tenant. You know, now you got to make sure you have a good tenant. You know, the old saying is better to have an empty kennel than a dead dog. So you want to make sure that your tenant has the capability to pay down the road. That may be hard, but you know, these folks have to pay their mortgages and their insurance, and they have their living expenses as well, their car insurance. So yes, a lot of people are going to have some investment challenges, and that's why I talked about the B&Bs. I think you're going to see those B&B rentals B&B hospitality rentals come back into regular rentals and have more inventory in some of those areas for rentals. And I think the rental rates are going to come down. Any other questions?
Arthur, if I can make a couple comments, a lot of the points you made were pretty important. And I know you talked specifically about first-time home buyers, and we've always taken great pride in our involvement in first-time home buyers. And I can tell you that we're actually doing a lot of online Zoom classes to keep them in the training process. But the problem that existed even before COVID was the fact that, it's particularly in New Orleans, the affordability just wasn't there. It didn't matter what they could afford, what the houses were selling for, you know, those numbers just didn't connect. So you almost kind of wonder if there is a little bit of a decline in value that may increase the affordability for some of these first-time home buyers to maybe get in, because there was a real void before.
Well, Brent, I think some of the void is being filled in 2 places. St. Bernard.
Yeah.
I mean, the fact that St. Bernard, through all this, their sales are just as high this past month in April as they were April last year. That's not a big number, but the fact that it hasn't gone down at all.
Yeah.
And that's the function of the sales price. So I think, and I'm also seeing a very dramatic, I shouldn't say it this way, this is not going to come out right. So let me be real clear when I say this. The average price of a home, of the same home, is not going to go down that significantly. Will it go down a little bit? Yes. That's not what I'm saying. The average home that is selling is a much lower priced home than what we have had in the past. The median sales price has gone down significantly. So I'm finding a lot of houses I didn't even know we had that many of them, to be honest. But if you look at the properties that are going under contract, for example, in Orleans Parish, there's a lot of them under $150,000. There's a lot of them. Maybe not in the best of condition, but hey, sweat equity. You do what you've got to do to get on the equity ladder. So I'm also seeing some opportunities of folks buying a lot of REOs still. There's still REOs, and people are buying those. And a significant number of those are showing up in the MLS. But you're right. I think people are going to migrate to those more affordable areas and take an area like Ponchatoula, Hammond, Tangipahoa Parish, St. Charles Parish, St. James Parish. I'm seeing more people move to those areas, businesses move to those areas, whether it's taxes, whether it's politics or whatever. The bottom line is the housing costs there are cheaper. So I'm finding that that people who want to live in the Lower Garden District and buy a house, well, maybe they can't afford it, but they certainly could in New Orleans East. They certainly can in St. Bernard. They certainly can in Kenner, where I'm seeing a real slowdown in sales in the Kenner market. And maybe that's just temporary, but that's been kind of a shock to my system to see that significant a decrease in the month of April in Kenner. Maybe that's just an anomaly and it'll recover, but I am seeing that.
Yeah. Another comment, overall closings of sales obviously is down. Speaking from the title side, we're doing a lot of closings that relate to refinances as well. As you know, you and I sat down again yesterday, but a lot of people I think are pulling out a bunch of cash, not knowing what tomorrow is going to bring them. So hopefully we can get past this COVID soon enough. I think there's going to be a lot of liquidity in the market. I think a lot of people have been pulling out kind of their rainy day fund to be able to weather the storm. So I think it depends largely on how long the storm lasts. And then at some point they got to do something with the money.
Yeah, folks in the middle income and the upper incomes, they may have some resources to fall back on. But, let's face it, somebody who was earning a family of four, earning less than $40,000 last year, they're in trouble. I mean, they're in trouble. They were working two jobs before. One of them is gone and the other one is part-time now. So, I mean, there's going to be, that's it. I mean, Show me where the jobs are and I'll show you where the real estate sales are going to be and where the values are going to hold.
Right. I agree.
Any other questions? Well, if not, it's been a slice of heaven. And if anybody has any questions, feel free to email me, arthursterbcow@ccim.net, and I'll try to get your question answered. And if I don't know where it is, which is probable, I'll point you into somebody who's credible, who probably does have the answer.
All right. Well, thank you, Arthur. We do appreciate it. I had the distinct honor yesterday of actually doing a refinance for Arthur and his wife, Barbara, and we did it outdoors. He said he had never had an outside closing before, so he's got to scratch that off the list now. So
I've done them in fire stations. I've done them every other place over the years, but that was nice, actually. I enjoyed it.
We had al fresco yesterday, right?
That's exactly right.
Of course, we were all, of course, I was wearing masks, and we were sitting far enough away, so we were good. Well, we want to thank you all once again. We're doing a weekly Bayou Connection. Stephanie, who's our for next week on the schedule?
Next week, we have Thursday at 10 a.m. Tina Felder with American Home Shield is going to be joining us, giving everybody some info on what they provide as far as their warranty services go.
Okay. And yesterday, we had a real good session with David Silverstein at WFG. So as Stephanie mentioned, all these Zoom meetings are actually videotaped. So if you don't have a chance to catch them live, they are available for reviewing. So with that being said, I want everybody to be safe, have a good weekend, stay 6 feet apart, and we're all going to get through this together.
Thank you, Arthur.
Okay, happy prospecting.
Thanks, guys. We'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye.